Hi, everybody. Welcome. Let me just make sure everybody's in and connected before I start on my spiel. Hi, my name is Carrie, and I work with the Andersons events team, of course. And I'm just here to welcome you tonight to our event with Dave Kindred and, of course, Jane Leavy. Leavy or Levy? I forgot to ask you, Jane.
Actually, Levy, and thank you.
Levy, okay. With Jane Leavy. And we're so excited to have you guys here tonight. So the Andersons family, believe it or not, has been selling books independently since 1875. And we've been through some really rough stuff in the past. We even made it through the last pandemic, but nothing is quite like what we have been dealing with this year, let me tell you guys. So we just want to say, I don't think I can say it enough times. Thank you for being here tonight. Thank you for coming out to support these amazing authors. Thank you for continuing to support Andersons through this time. It is difficult, but we're going to get through it, especially because people continue to support us and have followed us over to this virtual format, which I know is not as fun, but we greatly do appreciate your continued support of us through these events and through, of course, the purchase of the books through us as well. A couple of things about tonight before we get started. As your cameras and microphones are set to be off, and they will be off for the duration of the event so that the authors can speak without distraction. If you'd like to ask questions, though, we will have a Q&A session at the end, and you can submit your questions through the chat feature here on Zoom. And if anyone has any questions about how to do that, you can also chat me directly, or if you have any questions about the event at any time. And I will be collecting those questions, and then I will pop back on at the end when the authors are done speaking, and I will feed those questions to them, and we'll get through as many as we can before we run out of time. If you ordered a book for tonight, just know that you'll receive an email when your books are either ready to pick up at Anderson's, if that was what you chose, or when they have left the building when we've shipped them out, if you chose to have them shipped to you. If you've not ordered your books for tonight, you'd like another signed copy, because I can't push enough what great gifts that they make, I'll be putting a link into the chat that you guys can order from. I think that's about it. Oh, except I'm going to give another push for questions. This virtual format, it's funny, people are kind of shy. I don't know why. Because in person, of course, we always run out of time with questions because there are so many questions. But I just want to ask you guys to please be submitting those questions. Any questions, they really do make the event just more fun and more interactive, and it makes for a better event for all of us. So go ahead and, like I said, just put those through the chat, and I will be compiling them to ask at the end. Okay, but now on to the good stuff, the real reason we are here tonight. We are here with Dave Kindred, who has been a columnist for Louisville Courier-Journal, the Washington Post, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, the National Sports Daily, Sporting News, and Golf Digest. Kindred is the author of several books. He is one of only 2 writers who have earned sports writing's 3 highest honors, the Red Smith Award, the PEN America ESPN Lifetime Achievement Award for Literary Sports Writing, that is such a mouthful, and the Dan Jenkins Medal for Excellence in Sports Writing. He has also won the Naismith Memorial Basketball Hall of Fame's Kurt Gowdy Award for Outstanding Media Contributions, as well as a National Headliner Award for General Interest Columns. He is a member of the National Sports Media Hall of Fame, and he lives in Illinois. Yay. He is in conversation tonight with the one and only Jane Leavy. Jane is the author of 3 New York Times bestsellers. She was awarded SABR's Seymour Medal, presented annually to the best book of baseball history or biography. She has also been a finalist, or she was also a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle Award for Biography and the PEN ESPN Award for Literary Sports Writing. She is also the author of the comic novel Squeeze Play, which Entertainment Weekly called the best novel ever written about baseball. And my husband happens to agree with that, Jane, by the way.
And with private reading of the first paragraph.
With that, I am going to go ahead and disapparate through the magic of Zoom. But I'm right here. If you guys need anything, give me a shout, and I'll come back on at the end with questions. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you, Carrie.
So I guess I'm supposed to start. And
I think you're supposed to ask questions.
Yes, I know, David.
And make them short so that I have time to answer.
We've known each other a very long time, just in case you guys didn't know.
This is too true.
Yeah, very much too true. And I think I've read this book, David, almost as many times as I've read The Tempest by Shakespeare. And I was astonished rereading it today how little I recognize from the first pages you sent me. I was trying to remember how many years ago that was. Maybe you can fill in that gap and talk about the process of trying to chisel a portrait of a beloved child, grandson, out of pain.
Well, 7 years ago, you probably read 30,000 words. The first 6 months after he died, I wrote 30,000 words, and I thought I was done. I had barely started, of course, because 30,000 words is not enough for any book. And I thought I'd write 50,000. It wound up being 65,000 words in print. But in the stacks of paper that have gathered on my floor up to my knees, I probably have written 1,000,000 words on this book to get 65,000 that I thought told the story or that I really liked. I forget how many, maybe 24 chapters, 25 chapters. One chapter has remained intact from the start. It's a chapter that I never read. I wrote it once. Every time I come to it, I get stuck. And the readers can probably guess what that chapter is. But I wanted it to be the best thing I ever wrote. And so if you put that burden on top of the pain of writing it, if you put that burden on top of the reporting that went into it, then it becomes a heavy burden, actually a burden that becomes a habit almost.
An addiction.
7 years from the start, the book was published.
Would you say it was an addiction?
I think writing itself is an addiction. I've been writing since I was 15. Been a published writer at 15 in the Atlanta Argus, Atlanta, Illinois weekly newspaper, where I wrote about a nifty playmaking guard named Dave Kindred. So I have to write. I think you even said that when we first talked about this book, why I had to do it. Writers write. If I was a minister, maybe I'd make a sermon out of this whole saga. If I was a singer, I'd write a song, I'd write a symphony. But I'm a writer. I had to write. And the basic problem was the problem that I needed to solve for myself, if for no one else, was what happened. What happened? I had to know what happened. He had been in my life intimately. He slept with me when he was a child. I told him bedtime stories to make him go to sleep in the bed. I loved him in the way that I say in the book several times, I loved him in ways I've never loved anybody. Not my wife, not my mother. I just, for some reason, we had a bond that was almost unreal. So I needed to know, when he was 8 years old, his parents split up twins, Jared and Jacob. Kind of a nasty kind of divorce. And, so the stepmother didn't like the boys fighting with her new child. So they split up the boys, sent Jared to live with the mother and kept Jacob at home. And I thought that was a terrible thing to do. So I saw Jared only occasionally, weekends. And then through high school, I saw him, the same thing. Saw him in the summer sometimes, but we were still always close. And then after high school, he disappeared. Almost, to cut it short. After high school, he was gone. I had no idea where he went or why he went. And so when he died, I had to know. I had to know what happened. And so that's the driving force of the book, was to tell myself what happened.
Do you think you needed that much time in order to have the distance to do it? Or was it a function of how long it took to do the reporting?
A little bit of all of that, I think. I could still be writing that book. That's why there's a million words, because every time I read it, I thought, I can make it better than that. I can find out more information. You know, it's always better. You know, newspapers, the blessing and the curse of a newspaper life is that you write it, you hand it to somebody, and it's gone. It's in the paper the next day, and you write something else. This was never going to go away. You know, it's not that I wrote on it every day for 7 years. You know, I wrote on it, or it was in my mind certainly all the time. You know, but my wife had a stroke, catastrophic stroke, that left her an invalid who can't communicate, and that happened 3 years into it. You know, so I spent 2 years where I could not deal with Jared at all, and then had to come back to it uh, in the last year before it was published, before somebody bought it. And there's also that the publishing market was slow, so it was a year and a half from the time somebody said yes to publishing it to the time it was actually published. So the 7 years is not 7 years of constant work, but it's 7 years of caring about it, and it's something that I will care about forever.
We were talking earlier about the fact that when you started doing this, it was not a tragedy you were planning to write or thinking you would have to write. Jared was part of this very unknown, I mean, really under the radar subculture of traveling kids. And it was, in some sense, because I remember we talked about it, going to be a hymn to the whole seduction of American mobility. I mean, you mentioned Jack Kerouac up front, and you know, you led a life that was in many ways. You list all the places you've gone to dinner and reported from. You've led a peripatetic life, and his father Jeff took his kids on a sort of peripatetic life. And you thought this was going to be an adventure story, trying to understand what the lure was for these kids to opt out and find fun and whatever meaning in a life on the rails. And did you talk to Jared about that specifically?
I did. After he got out of high school and he was gone, occasionally I would get a phone call from him. You know, where he'd be in Ocala, Florida, or he'd be in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. And so I knew he was moving around. I knew that there was that kind of romance of the road, the youthful adventure. And I kept notes. He would call me. I kept notes of what he said, you know, because I'm a writer and everything's a story, you know, and I knew that this was going to be, I thought it was going to be, as you said, a romance. You know, it wound up being an elegy. His mother, Lynn, kept me in touch. You know, so I knew that bad things were happening. Got hit by a car, almost died. You know, got beat up in New Orleans more than once. You know, things were happening to him. He was drinking too much. Doctor in Michigan called Lynn and said, if your son doesn't stop drinking, he's going to die. You know, and so I heard those things. It wasn't that I was expecting him to die, but again, you know, I'm a reporter. You know, I took notes. I told him I was going to write something sometime. That's where the title comes from. The last time I saw Jared was in October of 13. He died in January of 14. So the last time I saw him, he was with two of his road dogs, a woman named Agro and a guy named Jimbo. And I told him, look, guys, I'm going to write about this someday. You know, so I want you to remember everything. Tell me everything. Make it funny. And Jared said, yeah, we can make it funny. And my son was standing there, Jeff. He said, leave out the tragic parts. And Jared said, yeah, no tragic. So they knew I would write something at some time. I didn't know what the end would be. Maybe should have known, maybe should have at least felt the foreboding of where this was going, but I just never did. You know, I never did. You know, and so there's some of that pain. Not that I didn't try to help him, tried to help him at every turn, but one of the things I've learned about addiction, basically I've talked to some counselors. David Sheff's books, Beautiful Boy and Clean, America's War on Addiction, were textbooks for me about what addiction is, how it controls your life. And again, you have said that what I wrote about Jared was about idealizing Jared. And I couldn't help that. I loved him. I wasn't going to throw him under the bus for something I believed he couldn't control. We become addicts. Who knows why we become addicts, but some people are addicted early. Some people are addicted easily. Some people can beat it. Some people can't. I think all of Jared's decisions on the road, all the decisions that led to the end, were decisions that the addiction made for him. Alcohol made the choices for him. He didn't choose addiction. Addiction chose him.
The saying in recovery is, why do alcoholics drink? Alcoholics drink because they're alcoholics. It sounds circuitous, but it is in fact true. And the only truism, and you refer to this, it's somewhere deep in the book, is that if you want somebody to try to get well, you have to keep coming at them over and over and over again, because you never know which time that you intervene or drag into a rehab or an AA meeting, it's going to click. And to me, the tragedy in here is that despite all the warnings, despite the offering at the very end of his life of a place in a good rehab, he was beyond help at that point. So I was going to actually ask you, do you think he was savable?
No. I detail in the book at least three, and you've just brought up a fourth time when he could have changed his life. First time was when he was hit by the car. He spent a winter really with his mother in Myrtle Beach. She did everything she could to persuade him to stay at home. They had a lawsuit possibility against the people, against the hospital, against the driver of a car that hit him. He wanted nothing to do with it. He said it was my fault. I shouldn't have been in the middle of the highway. Well, yeah, he shouldn't have been. But he could have changed his life then. With his father later, he could have changed his life. The stepmother had him in the car, taking him to a rehab place in Culpeper, Virginia. And he threatened to get out of the car while they were driving because he decided he just couldn't do it. The pain of rehab scared him more than the prospect of dying of the alcohol, because the rehab, the withdrawal is awful. It's terrible. He suffered seizures, from coast to coast. He was always rolling off a bench and winding up in a hospital, and so it was, I don't think he no longer controlled his mind. The alcohol, the substance, whatever the addiction is, sex addiction, alcohol, heroin, whatever the addiction is, it owns the mind. The only person really that can change it is the person who no longer can change it. And certainly I was on him all the time. Every time I talked to him, his mother was on him. Only he could make that decision, and he could not make it.
Some of the people here may not be entirely familiar with the whole trajectory, but Jared was by age 22 in such poor shape from chronic alcoholism, and we're talking about rot gut vodka morning, noon, and night. That the alcoholism would have killed him if he hadn't died from a fatal overdose, which was not his usual drug of choice. Drugs were not his drug of choice. Alcohol was. And I'm curious, do you think in some way, or have you wondered whether in some way that one last act was intentional, that he knew he would not be able to go back on the road the way he had been on the rails, I should have said.
No, I don't think it was intentional. I don't think that there was a suicidal thought in him. I think he knew where it was going. At that moment, all he wanted was to be out of the pain. I talked to the people who were in the room with him when he died. All he had pancreatitis the last year and a half of his life, the pancreas destroyed by alcohol. So he was in terrible pain. In fact, the mother had one question really for the coroner. She wanted to know if my boy was in pain at the end. And the coroner, because he had had some heroin, and the doctor said no, he'd have been feeling good. And she was happy with that. He was going to die. I don't think he wanted to die. He didn't take the heroin to die. He took the heroin to end the pain that night, just as he had ended pain many other nights with whatever he could do. Whether it was sleeping with another woman, whatever it was that would get him through the night, he did. And that last night, he did that.
Did you ever talk to him about the seduction of the life he had been leading? And I don't mean just that you could go anywhere and drink anything after panhandling to get enough dough to do it, but the romance of the rails and what that felt like to try to catch on to a roaring train, knowing the danger you'd be in doing it.
No, Jane, one of the oddities of the reporting of this book is that I never talked to him about it at all. The only time I talked to him was on the phone when he's on the road. And usually that was he needed $20 to go from Albany to New York City. And I'd Western Union him $20. But he was not an articulate reporter of his circumstance, we should say. He talked to my wife a lot. He talked to her more on the phone than he did to me. I'm not sure why that was, other than it's a grandmother instead of the grandfather. But everything I learned about his life on the road, I learned after he was dead. The life on the road, and I learned most of that from the woman named Agro, because she was articulate, she was an observer, she could write. And so every question I had about Jared's life on the road, Agro answered for me. And so I could transpose her view of life into what it must have been for Jared. And there were a couple people who were intimate with him in ways that were greatly helpful. Young woman named Maggie, who he would have married, could have married. But let me say one thing while I'm thinking of it, Jane. I don't want people to think that this book is dark and gloomy from beginning to end.
No,
because it's not. I wrote the book, and what I tell people, I mean, it's a very strange thing to say, but I got the book, the publisher sent me 25 books. The book is small, what they call trim. The book is a smaller trim than normal. It's not Mitch Albom small trim, but it's close enough that I hope that readers will see it in the store and think it's another Mitch book and buy it by the millions. But it's small. And when I first took it out of the box, I hugged it because that's what I wanted. I wanted to feel him again.
That was going to be actually my next question, David. You said you had to do it. This was not a choice. Yeah. This was a...
Well, I wanted people to understand who he was. He was not, one of my best friends saw a picture of Jared in the last year of his life wearing a winter parka with a hood up over his face, and he's got a beard. And this friend said, if I saw him coming down the street, I'd walk to the other side. Well, that hurt me because that's not who he was. He was a sweetheart. He was a sweetheart to everybody at all times. He had fun. Everybody's account of him. And my favorite quote is Maggie. He was the happiest kid I ever saw. And that's everybody's report from beginning to end. And I did resolve early on in this that if I did this reporting and I found out that Jared was just some kind of, street bum robbing people, or if he was a bad kid on the road, if he was not worth my time, I would not have done the book. I didn't want to find out that he was what I found out is that he is exactly the kid that used to sleep with me, and he was just a sweetheart, and I wanted people to read the book and come away wanting to hug Jared just as much as they wanted to hug the book.
That's an amazing thing that you hugged it. And it leads me to one of the questions I scribbled, which is, do you feel at the end of the process that the book has given him back to you?
But that was part of it too. Again, I had to know what happened. There was that, I knew kind of what happened until he was 18, but from 18 to 22, I really knew nothing except these phone calls, phone calls of terror from his mother, Lynn, where this had happened or that had happened. So I knew those things were happening. I didn't know the fun of it. If I had done the reporting and found out that there was no fun, that he was just a drunk every night his entire life, I wouldn't have done the book. I cut him some slack. I leave out the tragic parts. I probably left out. Well, I didn't leave out anything that I knew, but there's probably a whole lot that I didn't know that I never found out. But I wanted people to love him in a way that they can't love him the way I did, but I wanted to love him in their own way. I wanted people to read the book and think what I should have thought. Intervene. You love this kid. Stop him. Jared, when he was 13 years old, told my wife, "Grandma, I'm an alcoholic." She told me that. We both kind of like stood there. What 13-year-old kid knows about being an alcoholic? Well, he was telling us. Maybe that was his first cry for help, and we did nothing. Again, I'm not the parent. I don't see him every day, so it's not my job, and it's not my job to tell my son how to raise his son. I know all that, but I couldn't resist, putting my nose in their business when I felt it needed to be done. I just didn't do it strong enough or early enough. So grandpas and grandmas, don't sit back and watch. Do something. I don't know what, and it's hard, and it'll hurt, but you got to do something. Anything that you do is better than getting a phone call at 12:33 in the morning from your son saying Jared died. Anything is better than that.
David, would you read, or would you allow me to read a passage from Agro, who was kind of the Greek chorus of the traveling kids, who explained to at least to me, the allure of this life, because this is part of what made Jared make sense to me. Do you want to read it, or should I do it?
No, you please read it.
Okay.
Because Agro is great.
Agro is she's Kerouac.
Let me say that was one of the lines. The first time that Jared mentioned Agro, I said, "Who's Agro?" Well, she's this girl. I said, "A girl who's named Agro?" Yeah, she's aggravating and aggressive, so we just call her Agro. And she was. So please read.
So, and you describe her as unafraid and savvy, thick from shoulders to hips, 5'8", 170 pounds, and black bibs with her scissor chopped brown hair under a short billed jeans cap. I'll read the whole paragraph. When she was 19 and living in Plano, Texas, her high school sweetheart died of a meth overdose. She'd been on the road ever since, save for 18 months when she worked in a San Antonio meatpacking plant. A hard-ass romantic, she practically sang about her first ride on a freight. And this is what she said. There were 4 of us riding a flat car between 2 semi-trailers, otherwise known as a piggyback, from Oakland, California to Eugene, Oregon. We would hang our feet over the edge and we'd hide under the axles. That just blows my mind when passing through towns. It was amazing to ride through the Cascades, surfing the car, seeing the Milky Way in the night sky. I said, I'll never hitchhike again. I fell in love. That first ride, it's like your first kiss, scary but exhilarating at the same time. You know that either you'll ride freight till the day you die or never again. Me, I became married to those steel wheels and miles of track.
That's her. She
Well,
wrote me that. Everything the whole backstory of Jared's life on the road, I filtered through everything that Agro wrote to me. Agro probably wrote me 200 letters. She had a lot of time. She was in jail, and she has changed her life. It's amazing, kind of. I may talk about that later, but she was much the best in being able to, Jared could never talk like that. Jared certainly never could write like that, could never sing like that. But Agro could, liked it, and it all felt true to me. And I say in the author's note, who knows? I felt a need to put an author's note at the front of the book, saying it was the truest book. It's the truest stuff I've ever written, and I'm less sure of the facts than anything I've ever done. All these guys are, you called it rot gut vodka. They call it bottom shelf vodka. It was a term I learned. That's where all the cheapest vodka is, on the bottom shelf in the store. Unreliable narrators. But what they told me, I believed they believed. And
Right.
that was good enough for me.
Several readers and critics, reviewers have said that it was very courageous of you to write this book. How does that make you feel?
I've never felt any courage. I've never felt brave in writing this book. I had to write the book. It would have taken more courage probably to not write the book. I would have despised myself for the rest of my life because I had to know what happened. It didn't start out as a book of tribute to Jared. I just wanted people to know that he was a good kid, that he was a sweetheart. And this can be your kid. This can be your grandson, and that, I think probably that's what every grandfather thinks. But I just had to do it. There was no courage involved. I went to all the places that were necessary. The family. I think a lot of those people who think it took courage because of it's a tragic ending. You know that it's going to hurt. That's why I can't read that chapter, the death scene chapter. I wrote it once. I haven't changed a word of it. It's the hardest thing I've ever written. So I wrote it spare, wrote it quick. It's also the shortest chapter in the book. Maybe that took courage to write that. I don't think so. I just wanted to get it down on paper and get it over with. But I talked to the family. I talked to my son, his wife, second wife, talked to the mother. They've not read the book yet. The mother has. The mother has read it, loved it, thanked me for it, for what I did for her boy. But they know what's in it. So there's no family problem in breaking news to them. There are no surprises in the book for my son or the stepmother. I was hard on them early in the book. The narrative arc, that everything comes out okay at the end. So it wasn't an act of courage to write this. It was an act that I had to do. I just had to do it. And I'm very proud that I did do it.
Somewhere along the line in this last 7 years, I told you that I thought Jacob was a hero for surviving, for being the twin who did not, and with that weird psychic bond that twins have, relinquish, his judgment, his life to the self-destructiveness that Jared did. And you disagree with me. You think Lynn is the hero.
Oh, there's no doubt. It's not even close. You've been wrong on many things, Jane, but you're spectacularly wrong on this. And I resisted, as you know,
Yeah,
that idea. Lynn is the hero from the start. Lynn, I talk about intervention. Lynn did everything that she could as a mother, everything that she could. One of my favorite scenes in the book is Lynn, as an amateur photographer, thought she had an idea for a book. She lived in Myrtle Beach. She would take friends to the beach and ask them to write one word in the sand as to what they wanted out of their life. The tide would come in and wash that word away. When Jared was recovering from the car accident, he lived that winter with his mother. She took him to the beach, and he's walking on a cane with a cane because his leg was broken. And she asked him to write one word in the beach that you want washed out of your life. And he took his cane and wrote booze. So he wanted it gone, but he couldn't. It wasn't his decision to make. The alcohol was making decisions. And so she's the hero. She gets first call in the acknowledgments. I wouldn't have written the book if she didn't want me to write it. I wouldn't have written a book without her help. She got me the medical records, police records. She got me people. She talked to me all the time. So the book, I try to resist calling it my book. It's Jared's book. It's Jared's book, and it's Lynn's book. And I hope that people understand that. I just hope that people can read this book and have fun with Jared on the road. The first chapter of the book is a train ride from Southern California to New Orleans. Takes them 3 months. They're in no hurry. They get off on and off trains. It's an adventure. The first chapter of the book is a movie. Could be a movie by itself. Everybody comes out alive and happy, arriving in New Orleans for Mardi Gras. And there's another great character whose name was, I love these road names. Her name was Stray, Fall Down, Go Boom. Okay, you've got to ask, if you're a reporter, you got to say, huh? And she says, oh, I'm a stray cat. And when I get drunk, I fall down, I go boom. So she's Stray, Fall Down, Go Boom. I shorten it to Stray. But she was a darling. I talked to her several times just to recreate that train trip, where they go from Southern California through Nevada, through Arizona, through New Mexico, into Louisiana, and down to New Orleans, and it was that's the book I wanted to write. I wanted the whole book to be that, and Jared to come out at the end, and write in his own book.
One of the other ways I was spectacularly wrong was advising you at that beginning, when it was an adventure story, to go hop a train with Jared.
Yes.
Yeah.
At that point in time, I was no longer 21. I was no longer even 31. And at that point in time, I had talked to a guy named Dice. I'm not sure why he was named Dice, but he had one arm and one leg, because the other arm and the other leg were left under a train when he was trying to rescue his dog. So I didn't want to be involved with anything that might leave me without an arm or without a leg. And that was the least of the dangers of the stuff. I was too old to be trying any of that stuff. And even another guy named Booze Cop. Why was he called Booze Cop? Well, because he was advising everybody one night that they shouldn't be drinking that bottom shelf vodka. And somebody said, what are you, the booze cop? Yeah. Well, and while I'm explaining names, Jared's road name was Goblin. Why was he called Goblin? Because he was panhandling in a mall one night, probably one of the high dollar malls somewhere, where you see these bums sitting at the fountain. And Jared says to Booze Cop, people are looking at me like I'm some kind of spooky creature. And Booze Cop says, yeah, like a goblin. So he became Goblin. So there's that kind of fun moment in this book.
I don't know if you can see me on your screen because we were playing with the
Okay.
settings. Yes, I'm back. And we have some questions from the group. I have to tell you, because you mentioned that you had spoken to the man who had the one arm and the one leg, that I love books like this that you can do a lot of Googling afterwards and like learn even more about. So I've spent a lot of time over the last week Googling the Traveling Kids and seeing like some of their Facebook posts. No one I recognize from the book, but they do talk a lot about the fact that, you could lose a limb in this lifestyle, and they're pretty like, yeah, it happens. I mean, it's really fascinating. It's a total culture.
Well, I've told Jane, and I'll say this, I did the book, first of all, because it's a good story.
Yes.
I'm a newspaper man. I recognize a good story. And the good story is what you're talking about, this subculture of America, as Agro says, underbelly of America that most people don't even know exists. So the book is that. It's a good story that way. It's just a good road story. Second, it's an important story. I think any story about addiction, there's a million of them, but this one is a little different. I think any of them is important. And if you learn something from it, makes it more important. And the third element of this is that it's a personal story, my story. People had to convince me that I had to be in this book. Jane among them.
Wrong about that.
Yeah, you were right about
you
one
were right
thing.
about that, Jane.
Yeah, so it became that, a grandfather's story about his grandson's story. Thank you, Jane.
Beautiful.
You're welcome.
Well, we have some questions from the audience, and then I also have the pictures. So which would you like to go with first?
Can we ask the audience if they want to see the pictures now? Or is that
okay?
Can we do that?
Okay.
Well, or not.
Oh, yep. They're already all replying already in the chat. They said, yes, now.
Well, good. Because
that
was a little discussion I had with the publisher too. I wanted a picture. I just wanted one picture, and they wouldn't even do that. I didn't press it because they're in charge of that kind of stuff.
They think they know best. But...
Let's show them the 8-year-old picture first.
8-year-old picture first. This one's going to steal everybody's heart. So I'm going to screen share, and I'll let you guys see it. Can you guys see it now?
Yep.
Yeah, and Jared is the one on the left. They're 8 years old.
You're on the left.
Yeah, they're 8 years old there. They're sitting on the step of my house in Noonan, Georgia. And I said, hug each other. Let me just take a picture. Because they were visiting by then with us for a week. And I had taken them. Jared, you see, is wearing a Braves shirt. At that time, I had written a little book about a women's professional baseball team called the Coors Silver Bullets, based in Atlanta. And they had asked me to throw out the first pitch at an exhibition game at Fulton County Stadium. And I didn't want to do it. So I said, how about if I have my twin grandsons do it? Well, the girls all love that. So Jared and Jacob threw out the first pitch in Atlanta, Fulton County Stadium that week. And I have to say, that picture is just so good. That's who they are.
I mean, it looks like something that would come with a frame. It's very perfect. Okay.
It's in a frame on a table in my house right now.
It's a beautiful photo. They both are just so angelic in it. Do you want me to share the older photo of Jared?
Yeah.
Okay. There you go. You can see it.
This is when he's recovering from being hit by a car in Arizona. He's like 21 or 22 in this picture. He's staying with a woman in New Orleans named Christine Maynard, who was kind of an Earth Mother, Tennessee Williams, character, who liked all of the street people of New Orleans and would take them in when they needed to be taken in. Jared needed to be taken in at that time. She loved him, and he was there for off and on forever, in his time in New Orleans. Well, and she's a major character in the book too, Christine Maynard.
I really enjoyed, actually, it's funny, somebody did submit a question asking if you have any updates on any of Jared's road dog friends beyond what was shared in the book. And I personally wanted to know about her, if you had anything updated about her.
Well, Christine has a whole long history of medical problems. So she's always, but she's still not in New Orleans, but I think she lives in Baton Rouge and goes back and forth. She's a freelance writer and photographer. She's done work for the New York Times. So she was a good find too. She was a boxing fan too. She'd go to the boxing gym in New Orleans. So Jared got all excited because I'm kind of a Muhammad Ali expert. I've written a biography of Ali. And so Jared was excited about me meeting Christine. I never met her, but I've talked to her on the phone, exchanged 100 emails. She's a darling. But there's a girl, Jared's first girlfriend was Lindsay. And you may remember I mentioned Jimbo. Jimbo was a road dog, meaning traveling with Jared toward the end. Lindsay and Jimbo got married like 2 years ago. They now have a daughter who they named Kindred.
Oh, really?
In honor of Jared. Yeah.
Aww.
Kindred Smith.
Oh, that's great.
And Maggie is still on the road. She's in New Orleans. She's not good. I talk to her mother once in a while. She's a lot of these kids, I used to call them kids, she's late 20s now, are on Facebook. I did a lot of my reporting through Facebook, like Stray. I talked to Stray on the phone a couple of times, but almost all of her information came on Facebook.
Through like their posts or?
Yeah, well, I'd send a note to them. I met them all at Jared's funeral. That's where most of my reporting began. Agro is in prison in Chowchilla, California.
Oh, wow.
A women's correctional facility. I visited her in prison. She had completely changed her look. The paragraph that Jane read, she sounded like an NFL linebacker. Well, now she looks like a model. She's lost weight. Her hair has grown out, almost like yours, Carrie. And she's become a religious person in prison. She's in for murder, 15 to 30 years. She was one of 4 road people who beat up a kid and left him to die in a creek. So she's in prison. But she's I think eligible for parole in about 2 more years. And she's working very hard at getting her life in a place where she might be paroled.
Wow, it's a lot of heavy updates all at once. I'm kind of sad to hear about Maggie, like that she's not doing well. I have a soft spot for pretty much everybody that you interviewed for this book, but
I do too. I care about them. I visited.
Yeah.
I visited Maggie in Austin, Texas, when her life seemed to be going in a great direction, because she's got a kind of a writer capability too. She's not good with grammar and punctuation, but she's good with rhythm and observation. And I was trying to help her become a writer. But the bottom shelf vodka owned her.
That's so sad. Speaking of, who you met and how you interviewed, we did get another question through that asked, how did you conduct the interviews with all the traveling kids featured in the book? Did you meet them in person? Was it all done over emails, letters, a little bit of all of it?
Was like with Agro. I met Agro in Grant Park in Chicago one time. We had a long talk. I went to Austin, Texas to see Maggie. Stray I never met personally. I went to Myrtle Beach talking to the mother, went to Mount Airy for Maggie, did a lot of traveling to find people, but a lot of that, most of the aggro stuff was her letters to me from prison. Most of the stuff from Stray was Facebook. Booze Cop, I would talk to on the phone when he had a phone. All of these kids usually have a phone, but they lose it or they don't keep it paid up, whatever. But most of it, I'd say the greatest majority of the book is Facebook. They all try to stay connected, or their parents want them to stay connected, and Facebook is the way that they do it.
What about Michael did? How is he?
Michael Stephen,
Mhm.
lives in Alexandria. He's a very smart guy, kind of bizarre kind of guy, but he was the first to befriend Jared,
Mhm.
taught him how to survive on the streets of Washington, D.C. He's okay. He's got a real job, I think. Doesn't make much money. But in fact, he sent me a note the other day, that he heard the book was out. And could I send him one? Because he couldn't afford to buy himself one. So I will. He was a great help.
Yeah,
And
his
I did
story is
see
really
him in person too.
All right. This is we're almost out of time, so we maybe have time for one or two more. This is a great one from Veranda Smith. She asked, what is the one singular message that you hope every reader will take away from this book?
That is a great question. I want people to understand, first of all, under the dirt, under the grime, under the scars, real and imagined, these are people. These could be your grandsons. These could be your granddaughters. And I think that anytime there's a suspicion of alcohol, suspicion of addiction, you need to jump in early and hard and do something. Try everything. I never did. But again, it wasn't my job. I didn't think, but I should have done something more. I think early intervention, early and quick.
Well, honestly, I mean, and this is another question that someone submitted, and this kind of feeds into what you just said. One of the hardest parts about loving an adult with addiction or mental illness, I have an adult brother with some mental illness issues, is that there's really just not a lot that those of us who love them can legally do once they're adults to intervene. And I guess my question for you, or the question that came in, and my question for you is, would you like to see reform in that area? Do you think there's anything we could change that could make getting involved easier?
Well, that was one of the things that Michael Stephen did was tell me how impossible it is to help somebody who doesn't want to be helped. If they're an adult, there's almost nothing you can do. You can't make them go to a rehab place. You can't have the rehab place keep them. So I don't know what reforms would be necessary. I mean, it's personal liberty, it's civil liberty. I don't think you can.
I think
the world would be full of younger sisters wanting to commit their older brothers, for no reason.
We've talked about this, David, but once a kid hits 18, you have, as a parent or a grandparent, no rights. So if you're going to intervene, you have to do it while you're legally entitled to do so. And
well, even then, I mean, I was involved with taking Jacob to an alcohol place when he was 15 or something. He walked in and immediately said, "I don't want to be here." So the counselor said, "So leave." And that was the end of that. I couldn't make him cooperate. She couldn't make him cooperate. So what do you do?
Well, you don't
what do you do?
That's one thing.
Huh?
You don't give them money. That's one thing.
Easy to say.
Yeah,
I know.
No,
I've been there. I know.
But when it's your grandson, he's calling from Albany, New York, and says, "Grandpa, I need $19 to get the mega bus to the city." $19. It's easy. I mean, I've made a lot of trips to Western Union for $19 and $20 and $25.
Well, here's a question, David. What would you do differently now if you had it to do over?
Well, I mean, I don't know. That's an impossible question to answer. I mean, if you know what's going to happen, you don't know what's going to happen. You hope for the best. You just keep hoping for the best. All I think that I could do is what I did. I just loved him. I loved him all the time. If Lynn needed $750 to fly to Phoenix to see him in the hospital, I gave her $750. I just did what I wanted to do. And I always wanted to help him.
Well, and you should know that really comes through in the book, actually. Like you had mentioned earlier, you were concerned that the book comes off dark or that people are going to think it's dark. It's not. I really feel like that love that you have for him and that pride you had for him, you know, even with some of the choices he made, he was so loved, and that absolutely came across in the book.
Yeah. Well, good.
Yes. And in some ways, I think he was really lucky to have that, because I know that there are some families that would disown a kid who decided to go out on the road, right? But
Yeah.
you guys really loved him.
I just couldn't do that. I couldn't even think of doing that. Never once
Okay.
occurred to me to do that.
And
I
that's
mean,
where that
people
love.
told me you just got to cut him off, you know, but as I said to Jane just now, how do you do that? I couldn't do it. I couldn't even think of doing it. I mean, if I thought at 18, you know, he's a bum, he's alcoholic, he's living on the street, he's riding trains, you know, out of my life, kid, what would I have lost? What would I
A
have
lot.
lost? Yeah. And I didn't want to lose that.
And as you point out in the book, I mean, he's a person, and people on the street have value, right? Like just because they're on the street.
Yeah.
So,
Yes.
all right. Well, I think that we are actually out of time tonight.
Okay.
And we got through most of the questions, or at least touched on them. So I just want to, again, thank you both so much for being here. That was a really great conversation. It was fascinating. I cannot recommend the book highly enough. I have an arc, so it might be differently shaped.
There you go.
And
Thank you.
it's
Thank you.
it's just a fantastic and really moving, and like I said, portrayal of love. I think the love just comes through so strong. So,
A love story.
so on that note, I get a little emotional because of the ending. But on
Yeah,
that note,
yeah.
thank you both
Okay.
for being here.
Well,
It was a
thank you,
wonderful
Carrie.
conversation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And then thank you to everyone who came, and I hope that you guys have a wonderful night. I just want to again thank everybody for your continued support of Andersons and all small businesses through this terrible time. Please shop local and please stay safe out there. Hopefully we're almost there. Hopefully. And good night.
Like,
Good night.
thank you.